Nik speaks all the time about persecution and what's happening around our world. He has actually interviewed over 600 persecuted Christians in 72 countries where persecution in those countries is both normal and expected. And he's written this book. It has to do with his story and much, much more about persecution and what it means to us as believers. Nik, welcome to today's Issues.
Thank you, my brothers. It's good to be with you.
Nik, thank you for being on with us. I'm Tim here with John. The book title is The Insanity of God, and when I saw your book title, I had to do a double take.
Me too.
Nik, can you tell us how you came up with that title?
Well, we were actually down here in Florida. We'd come in from overseas, and there were about 6 of us with our agent and some other dear brothers and sisters, and we were looking at this whole thing of sheep among wolves, and we were looking at the whole concept of a God that would send his only begotten Son to die on the cross. And we had flip chart papers just stuck on wall after wall after wall, and I took a bathroom break and came back, and I looked at everything we had done, and I said to this team and my wife, I said, you all know that this ministry and Jesus dying on the cross represents to the world, the way the world would look at it, as the insanity of God. And our great agent just slapped the table and said, we're done. And it was just a God-given moment.
Well, in that, the way you described it, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Right.
I mean, we took a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old to Africa 30 years ago, and then we buried our middle child in Africa as part of the story, and the insanity of God died of an asthma attack when he was 16 on Easter Sunday morning. And the looks that we get, not just, not from people who are not believers in Christ, but from the church in general, is just they think we're some of the craziest, most insane people on the planet. And, it's not a bad place to be.
Yeah, I'm talking to Nik Ripken, R-I-P-K-E-N. The book is called The Insanity of God, A True Story of Faith Resurrected. Okay, talk about your story, Nik. Where do you want to begin? We've got about 15 minutes to visit with you today.
Well, brothers, I think I'll start in present active tense. I got a bunch of email this morning. Like I said, I just got in from the Middle East 2 nights ago, and my wife gets in an hour or so. And this morning, early in Kenyan time, one of our strongest Somali believers and leaders was up on the border of Kenya and Somalia, and he was shot dead this morning. And he's a believer we have known for about 15 years. And I got a letter from another worker, she's actually in Europe, and there a lady from Muslim background has come to Christ. And in Europe, her persecution by her family and friends had been so fierce that this new young worker was writing her Uncle Nick and Aunt Beth and Aunt Ruth and say, what do we do now? Now that this particular sheep is being savaged by the wolf, what do we do now? And so the whole concept of the insanity of God is, again, about the love of God that put his only begotten Son on a cross. And today, as well as in the New Testament time, the concept of God sending us out as sheep among wolves is as real today as it was in New Testament times.
Nik, you've interviewed over 600 persecuted Christians around the world. What is it that drives these believers to continue at all odds against them, to continue to share their faith, to be bold for Christ? I mean, what is it, as you've talked to people and you yourself have been persecuted, what is it that drives them to continue to do this?
We put on, and it's not a plug, but we put on nikripken.com website on the opening page that if the resurrection is true, that changes everything. And in a lot of places, like China, former Soviet Union, India, parts of India that we could name, these believers are doubling the number of believers every year and doubling or more the number of house churches planted every year. But the fact is, they know that they're already dead to Christ, dead to themselves, they're alive in Christ rather, and that their whole lives, their beings, their family, are defined by eternity, by the resurrection. And they stand outside of an empty tomb rejoicing, and they say crazy things like, to me, that for us not to pray that their persecution would cease, but that they would remain obedient in their suffering and persecution. And the question that Ruth and I have come to ask is not why are they persecuted? It is why are we not?
Why? What's the question?
Why are we not? Why are they persecuted, and why are we not here in this country? That's a good question. I mean,
that's good, but I don't want to be persecuted.
I don't either. You know?
Well, it's not your choice.
No, I'm saying, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying, I'm thankful that we live in a country that we're not physically persecuted for our religious expression.
Well, let's play a little game together. I've done this in about 30 or 40 churches in America and in Europe and in Kenya, and I ask them this question. When we're praying in public and praying in the pulpit, we often thank God. God, I thank you that I live in a country where I'm free to... How do y'all finish that sentence?
Free to worship you.
Free to pray.
Isn't it interesting that we never thank God that we're free, that we live in a country where we're free to witness?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's
true.
True. Mm-hmm.
And so they are being persecuted because they refuse two things. They refuse to leave Jesus alone, and they refuse to leave witness alone. If they even that last thing, if they left that alone, you can die a happy person in your bed in Saudi Arabia. But they're witnessing to their faith, and therefore, hence comes the persecution. If you're not sharing your faith, and significant people outside of the church are not coming to Christ, there's nothing there that Satan needs to go after.
No, I agree with you, Nick. I understand what you're saying completely. I guess what I was saying was we're thankful that we live in a country that, at least to this point, is not like communist China, for instance, where they don't allow for, except the state-controlled church, they don't allow for Christians or anybody else, for that matter, to, have free associations without fear of, being sent off to some camp somewhere or something of that nature.
Hey, guys, when I was in China, I stayed with 3 house church movements where 40% of the pastors have been in prison for 3 years. And they called prison their seminary, their theological training school. And they laughed at me and asked me how many degrees I wanted to get in theology or missions if you got it by going to prison. But since 1948 and the communist takeover in China, we've gone from about 400 to 500,000 believers in severe persecution to the very lowest estimate today to being 80 million.
You mean that's not 80 million Christians?
80 million believers in Jesus in house churches.
Wow. Right. So what's the point of that?
And the point of that is government is not the solution. That's we have to be careful with. And where Christianity is growing the most, there is the most persecution.
So should we desire persecution?
No. You just realize, as I shared with this dear sister this morning in her email, I said, in the Bible, persecution is normal. And when there's a significant movement of God, persecution is the byproduct of people coming to faith. And guys, if I often say to young workers, if you've got somebody on your team that is afraid of persecution, then have a biblical conversation. If you've got somebody on your team that likes persecution, get them some psychological help because they're not mentally balanced.
Yeah.
Persecution is not good or bad. It just is.
Yeah. Talking to Nik Ripken. Nick, what's your website again?
It's nikripken.com.
Ripken. And you've spent how many years traveling the world and dealing with Christians all over the world?
Well, we left the States on January 1st, 1984 with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and thought we'd spend most of our time in Central Southern Africa, got run out of there by malaria, 1991, went to Somalia and watched 150 believers in 1991. By 1998, there were only 4 of them left alive.
Wow. Where, in what country?
In Somalia.
Why? What happened?
Well, they just, as civil society just imploded, no schools, no government, anything, and they're still struggling today. A conservative Islam rose up, and they just, if they didn't run you off, they hunted you down and killed you. They killed 4 of my best friends in 1994 in a 45-minute period, and that does something to you. And when we walked out of Somalia with our tails between our legs, we were asking the question, is greater is he that's in us actually than he that is in the world? And so we went to believers in persecution, like China, like Soviet Union, all across the Buddhist and Hindu world back to Islam, asking the question of believers in persecution, is Jesus who he says he is? And if he is, how does persecution figure into the life of believers? And these folks, they just shouted with the faith of Jesus, and they felt so honored to share in his suffering. And so again, while I love the country that birthed me and the country in which I came to Christ, it is interesting that persecution is a byproduct of significant numbers of people coming to faith. And generally, when you see little persecution, you're seeing little growth in the church.
The title of Nick's book is The Insanity of God, A True Story of Faith Resurrected, and you can get that. It's published by B&H Books, and so you can get that anywhere.
Nick, I was wondering if you